So it's funny. As I was recording this episode, I realized that there was a teaser trailer for One Piece that came out, I think, a couple weeks ago, and I completely forgot that was happening. I mean, I knew that they were making a live action movie. I just forgot that it was still a thing. Oh boy, man, I'll give my thoughts on that, but man, that's I guess it just doesn't feel real to me that they're actually doing it. Oh well, more on that. Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So, as promised, I'm finally putting up my spoiler review for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom for the Nintendo Switch. I gave my initial thoughts on the game a couple weeks ago, and so I'm not going to go over things like the story in too much detail just because I kind of touched on that last time, so I'm not going to, I don't want to be like a broken record as far as that goes, but this is just going to mostly be me giving my thoughts on briefly the story, the gameplay, combat, the overall world, and then kind of giving my overall impressions of the game. So I said in the last episode when I talked about it that I love this game, and that really hasn't changed. I couldn't tell you how many hours I put into this game in total. I want to say between 40 to 50 hours, maybe more. I have definitely put a lot of time into it, doing a lot of side content. This is definitely one of those games that I think justifies it for sure. But yeah, just to kind of briefly give my thoughts on this game, I definitely am not going to be surprised if this wins Game of the Year for 2023. I think it is arguably the best game on the Nintendo Switch, and I'll give some of my reasons why here in a little bit. But yeah, this game is phenomenal. It really is. I'm not even trying to overhype the game. I mean, I feel like it's just, I don't think it's a question at this point. This is going to go down, I think, as one of Nintendo's best games. I'm sure there's going to be some people out there who aren't going to like it, but I think by and large this game has been a huge success, and I know it's selling really well. I think I looked up once what it was selling before, but I can't remember now what its international sales are, but I mean, it's pretty much killing it. But to go over the story just very briefly, the game takes place a few years after the events of Breath of the Wild when you defeat Calamity Ganon. In this game, it shows Link and Zelda exploring some of the depths of Hyrule Castle. They discover there's this weird, goopy poison substance called gloom that appears to be coming from somewhere beneath Hyrule Castle. When they get down there, they find this weird mummified person that seems to be held in place by this strange disembodied hand. Of course, when they go down there, creepy shit starts happening. The mummy comes alive and attacks them. Link tries to defend Zelda. His arm and the Master Sword both get badly damaged. Link gets the new arm, which you've seen that in the trailer. That's his Ultra Hand that he gets in this game. Zelda disappears, and Link has to go on an adventure to, once again, you guessed it, save Zelda and defeat the evil force in the game, which I don't really think I'm giving away too much. The bad guy in this game is Ganondorf. They show him in the trailer, so I don't think I'm really giving away too much there. I don't think that's much of a shock. And so that's basically the story. You are introduced to the Zonai race, which is like a bunch of robots, like cyborg people, and that's essentially what your hand belongs to. They also show you the Sky Island, the Sky Islands that exist above Hyrule. And once you basically are given room to explore, essentially you can leave the Sky Islands, go back down to Hyrule, and use your Ultra Hand abilities to basically explore the world as you see fit. So one thing I definitely want to say about the story in this game is it does kind of suffer from some of the same issues that I think the story in Breath of the Wild had, and that's mainly that they don't give you a whole lot. I mean, you're given some in the beginning. They give you just enough to kind of get you started. But from what I remember in Breath of the Wild, I remember the story, you talk to the old man who turns out to be the king of Hyrule near the beginning in the Great Plateau. And a lot of that story is kind of front-loaded in Breath of the Wild. They kind of tell you a lot of what happens in the beginning, and then you kind of piece together things as the story goes on at your own pace. They don't quite do that in this game. In Tears, it definitely feels like a lot of chunks of the story are kind of dropped throughout the world. There's these side quests you do. They're called the Tears of the Dragon quests, where when you complete them, you actually are given little snippets of what's been going on with Zelda's character and kind of some of the events that are leading up to what's going to happen at the end of this game. So it's not quite as front-loaded as Breath of the Wild was, but still, you're not given a whole lot of story. There's definitely long stretches where you don't really get much in the way of story. Really, it's just kind of an excuse for you to go and explore the world and to go to the 4 different temples in the world. But, I mean, the story's fine. Looking back, when I think about other Zelda games in the past, to me the story was never really super intricate. Like, I'm hard-pressed to say that I remember, like, what the hell was going on in a lot of other Zelda games. Like, and I've played quite a few of them. Like, I've played Ocarina of Time, I've played Wind Waker, I've played Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Link to the Past. I haven't played a whole lot of the older games, like from the SNES era, but to me, like, the stories of the Zelda series were never really like anything groundbreaking. But I think the story here is fine. I mean, it feels epic enough in its own right. They do a good job of definitely making Ganondorf feel like a threatening character. Actually, when you're first introduced to him in his mummy form in the beginning of the game, like, that honestly was, like, I think his best form. I kind of wish they'd kept him like that throughout the entire game. He still takes on his iconic look from previous games. Kind of looks like a mix between how he looked in Ocarina of Time, but with more of like a modern cel-shaded look. Like a cross between the Ocarina of Time Ganondorf and Ganondorf from Wind Waker, which I totally like. The dude's freaking built in this game too. Like, Ganondorf's always been a big guy, but man, he's freaking swole in this game. Dude's been hitting the gym. And I think I said this in the last video too. It's really weird hearing them talk, because I've never heard any characters talk prior to Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. And when Ganondorf first talks, I mean, don't get me wrong, his voice is imposing, it's threatening, but it is just really weird seeing his character speaking in this game. I don't dislike it. It's just strange. I don't really quite know how to feel about it. I know there's going to be a lot of people who this is probably going to be their first Zelda game, this or Breath, and so they're going to be used to it. They're going to probably be thinking like, what? They never talked before? That's weird. That's, back in my day, back in the olden days, they didn't talk. But yeah, like I like the characters in this game for sure. I like the different stages that you get that follow you around. I'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. Like, the characters in this game, I think, are probably some of the biggest selling points. Like, I like Pyrrha, her character from the first game. I like how in this one, how she's like older. She's like in the first one, she was like a little kid, and in this one, she's like an adult and stuff. I like her character. She's funny. I like the Gorons too. Like, the different races in the game are really cool. Like, I like the Zoras. I like their design in this game. I like the Ritos, like the bird people. I think they're probably my favorite. Well, actually, no, I like the Gorons. The Gorons are really cool too. Like, I love the way they animated them in this game. Just the way they have like the big oversized hands and arms, but they have like little stubby feet. They kind of remind me of, like, the way their bodies are. They remind me of Gluttony from Full Metal Alchemist, which is kind of funny. And the way the fact that they roll around just kills me. But yeah, I like that aspect of the game. That's actually one thing about this game that I really enjoy. And I think you're going to hear me make a lot of comparisons to this in Breath of the Wild. One thing I really like about the world in this game is that it definitely feels like a real world. It feels lived in. Like, the different races you find, like the Gorons, they have their own little realm in the mountain. The Ritos live in the snowy area. The Zoras live in, obviously, the water area. So it's cool that each race, they have like their own area in the game, and each area feels unique and distinctive. I like that about the game. It definitely adds to the exploration element of it, for sure. So I really dug that. So as far as like the gameplay goes, that's kind of one of the categories I want to talk about next. This game is very similar to Breath of the Wild. I think I had touched on that in my previous video. If you've played the last game, then you pretty much know exactly what to expect from this one in terms of gameplay. Link controls basically identical to how he did in the last game. Like, it's been a long time since I played Breath. I only played through it once, and that was 6-7 years ago, something like that, and I really haven't touched it since. But yeah, like, I feel like Link controls basically the same. You have your jump button, your attack and everything is still the same, blocking, all that stuff, including using your paraglider. That's in this game too. Same controls, everything. It feels pretty much identical to Breath of the Wild. Actually, if you hadn't played Breath, or if you had just played that game for the first time and just now finished it and jumped into this game, it would almost feel like you were just continuing the first game in many ways. just because it really doesn't feel like it misses much of a beat. Even the look of the game, I mean, I'd have to go back and play the last one to really compare the graphics, but this game looks pretty much identical to it. I'm sure they probably made some improvements. I personally can't see too many in terms of like how the game looks, but I personally I like the cel shaded look of it. I like how it's not quite that cartoony look of Wind Waker, but it's not quite that dark, more mature look of Twilight Princess. It's kind of somewhere in between, not quite as like oil painting looking like Skyward Sword was, but I really dig the look of this game for sure. I think Wind Waker is still probably my favorite in terms of just overall design, but I love the way this game looks. Definitely certain shots of this game are breathtaking. You have a camera in the game, so you can take pictures of certain moments, and there were definitely some, like picture-worthy moments throughout the game, just like certain like sunrises, sunsets, especially when you're on the Sky Islands. When you're up high above Hyrule, and like when the sun's coming up and stuff, that definitely makes for some really cool shots. But anyways, one big element of this game that really sets it apart gameplay-wise from Breath of the Wild is, like I mentioned before, Link gets his right hand becomes the Ultra Hand, and so with that he gets these new abilities, Ultra Hand abilities. Several of them, just to name off the different abilities that you have, at least the main ones that you use, is you have Ascend, which allows Link to basically jump up and, like the name implies, he ascends through certain platforms above him. It's usually like flat platforms. Like if you're in a building and there's a flat ceiling above you, you can actually ascend through the ceiling and go on top of the roof. You have Ultra Hand ability, which allows you to pick up things. You can move objects around, so you can move like rocks, boulders, planks of wood. I mean, there's obviously limits to what you can move, but still, I mean, you've got quite a bit of freedom on the stuff that you can move around, and that plays in really nicely to one of your other abilities, which is Fuse. And Fuse is a really cool ability, which basically allows you, just like the name implies, you can fuse certain objects together. And the amount of things you can fuse together in this game are it's really vast. There's a lot of combinations you have. It's nearly endless. Like just the amount of stuff that you can combine together. You can use it to build like aircraft or like seacraft and stuff like that. You can build like boats. You can even build like makeshift cars. You can even build like basically mechs if you want. It takes a little bit of work, but you can definitely do it. You can build like gun turrets. You can build just crazy shit in the game using this ability, and it's so awesome. Another ability that you have is Recall, which basically allows you to you can rewind certain objects. So you use this a lot for puzzles in the game. So for example, if there's like a wheel or something, like a gigantic like water wheel or something, and you're trying to get it to a certain position so you can climb up it, you can use your recall ability to rewind that wheel so it'll turn the opposite direction. So if it was turning clockwise, it'll start turning counterclockwise for a certain amount of time. This ability also comes in handy because it's a good way to traverse around Hyrule, because there's chunks of Sky Island that will fall to the ground, and you can actually recall those and they go back up into the sky, and you can actually jump on top of them and ride them up. And sometimes you can take them to Sky Islands that were above you that you otherwise couldn't get to, or you could just use them to get to a better height so you could paraglide somewhere that you were trying to get to. The Ultra Hand abilities in this really come in handy. There's another ability that you get, I think it's kind of a side ability that you don't get it in the main story, but there's one called Auto Build, where it basically saves anything that you build. So if you make some weird, crazy aircraft and you forgot how to do it, it saves it in your Auto Build ability, and you can just use that to just build it fast. As long as you've got either the materials or like the Zonai resources to do it, you can build that object, which comes in really handy. It's definitely useful when you need to build something fast, but you just either don't have the time or you don't have the resources with you to do it. So that's really nice. The Ultra Hand abilities, I think, to me, are what really make this game stand out, and I think, in my opinion, what make it better than Breath of the Wild. You had similar abilities in that game. I don't remember what they were called, but I remember you had like the ability to like, it was like magnesis. You could pick things up, you could pick up objects, and you could create like this little energy bomb. And those abilities were kind of cool, I guess, but this definitely feels like a much more refined, superior ability to what was in the last game. Like, these abilities just make the game so much fun. They make exploring the game just so cool. And there's a lot of just like there's a lot of moments in this game from those abilities that you don't even think about until afterwards, and then you're like, wait a minute, I wonder if I could have done this, and you go back and you try it and it works. Like one example was in the game you explore a lot of caves and wells, like you go underground quite a bit. And one thing that in the beginning that I was getting frustrated with was when I would go into wells to explore, like I would be like, okay, how the hell do I get out of here? There's no ladder. And then finally it dawned on me, like after, an hour or so of like just teleporting around the map, I just was like, wait a minute, could I just use ascend to get out of here and just go through the ground? And sure enough, I could. And I was like, well, son of a bitch. That's awesome that they thought of that. Like the amount of detail that Nintendo put into the gameplay in this game is really remarkable. Just the amount of freedom that you have in terms of like what you can do with your Ultra Hand abilities. Like I kind of had mentioned this before in my last video talking about it. Like odds are if you can think it, you can probably do it in this game. You might have to kind of go out of your way to make some of your designs work, but you can probably do it. Like there was one point in the game where there was a group of enemies near this cliff, and I was at the top of the hill kind of overlooking them. And I had materials nearby. It wasn't much. I had like a square plank of wood and like 4 wheels, and then like another plank of wood that I could kind of put on attach to the other one and make it sort of like a makeshift ram. And I kind of thought, well, I don't want to fight these guys, but I need to get, and I don't really want to go around them because, it would take me time. I wonder if I can just create like a small little like battering ram and just knock them off the cliff. And I did, and sure enough, it worked. Like it knocked pretty much all of them off the cliff just instantly, and it was hilarious. There were a lot of moments like that playing this game, just from using my Ultra Hand abilities that, I don't know, it was just fun. Just the amount of freedom that you have in this game is just really cool. Like I had so much fun just kind of experimenting and just kind of running around trying different things out on enemies and seeing what would work and what wouldn't. And that was another thing about this game that I really liked more than Breath of the Wild. And Breath of the Wild, I did explore quite a bit. I remember doing the shrines in that game. And that's another thing too. Shrines do return in this game. And they pretty much serve the same function as they do in the first game. But anyways, in Breath of the Wild, I did explore a fair amount, but nowhere near as much as I did in this game. And I think a lot of that was just because I feel like I have a lot more freedom in this game and more flexibility that I didn't in the last title. Like in this game, it actually does feel rewarding to go out and explore and try to see what all's out there. Not necessarily because you get something that's worth your time. I mean, sometimes you do. Sometimes you might get a weapon that was worth, taking that extra time to explore. But I feel like for the most part, your rewards are just like discovering more of the map, discovering a shrine that maybe you didn't know was there, or finding a new path to like a tower so that you can unlock more of the map. Like exploring is definitely its own reward in this game, in my opinion. Just kind of some comparisons between this game and Breath of the Wild real quick. Yes, I mentioned that shrines do return in this game. You do use those to collect these little jewels that you can use to upgrade either your health or your stamina. So that returns in this game. In the last game, you find these towers, and that's how you unlock more of the map. Again, that is also in this game too, although I like the tower system in tiers more because it makes it easier to get around the map. The towers in this game actually act like sort of like cannons. They launch you into the air, and then they launch you pretty high up, so then you can actually use your paraglider to basically use the altitude to get to different spots. So if you need to get to like a sky island that's near a tower, you can use it to get to that. Or if you just need a better vantage point or just want to try to paraglide to a part of the Hyrule map, you can use a tower to do that. And oftentimes it can help you bypass entire sections. Like if there's a bunch of annoying enemies or a really strong mini boss that you just don't want to deal with, you can use the towers to kind of get around them. So that's really nice. And yeah, like as far as like the map goes too, the map is pretty much the same map as the last game. Hyrule is basically the same. And yes, there's different shrines, there's different there's obviously little tiny changes to the geography, but for the most part the map is basically the same. I'll kind of go into that here briefly. But yeah. Gameplay, like I said, Link pretty much controls the same as he does in Breath of the Wild. The Ultra Hand abilities are a little bit different. How you use them, I think, is pretty much the same as it was in the last game, like in terms of like the button combos you use to use your different abilities. Like I said, it's been so long since I played Breath, I can't remember a whole lot of that game. But and kind of in the same subject as gameplay, I wanted to talk about combat a little bit. So combat, I think, in this game plays a much bigger role than it did in Breath of the Wild. Yes, combat obviously played a big part in that game too, but what I like about it in Tears, more so than the last game, is that thanks to the fuse ability that you have, combat definitely feels a lot better, in my opinion, and it feels like you have a lot more options available to you. So what I mean by that is you can fuse objects to not just your weapons, but to your shields and to your bows, or, well, more specifically, your arrows. And this really creates a lot of different options for you in combat. Like, you can put objects on your shield to either make them stronger, like some kind of mineral or something like diamond or whatever, or you can use that same material to strengthen your sword or whatever weapon you're using. But you can also just put weird abstract things on your shields and weapons too. Like, you can put like a mushroom on your shield so that when an enemy hits it when you're blocking, it'll explode and it'll blind them or something, or it might freeze them or electrocute them. You can attach different objects to your arrow. One combo that I used a lot, that I think a lot of people did, was the bomb arrow combination. You can attach like creature eyeballs to your arrows so they become like heat-seeking missiles, and it's a great way to take out like flying enemies. You'll see flying enemies throughout the game that'll be carrying chests, and you can use that to take them down. It's like the amount of options you have available are just, it's insane. And like I said, this is part of what makes the game fun, is just sort of just experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't. And sometimes things will just blow up in your face, literally, but it's actually kind of hilarious. Like I love that part of the game. It's really fun. It makes combat a lot more interesting, I think, than Breath of the Wild. The one thing I will say, though, is, and I talked about this in the last video where I talked about when I gave my initial thoughts in the game. Yes, item durability is back in this game. But thanks to the fuse ability, I do think that really helps the game kind of mitigate that a little bit. Your weapons still break, but you can fuse them with different items that will help not just increase their strength, but also their durability. I think there is a way you can fix your weapons. Like, there's like these creatures called Octoroks that you can feed your weapons to, and I think they'll repair them and actually even upgrade them, but I didn't really do that much. It was kind of a pain because I didn't run into them that often, and I didn't really feel like looking for them, so I kind of just didn't bother with that. The nice thing about this game, though, is I do feel like you find enough weapons that it's never really an issue. Like, I can't think of a time when I really came close to running out of weapons. And like in the first game, their Korok seeds do return in this game. The little Korok guys do show up again, and there's actually these funny little side missions where you kind of have to help them find like their buddy, and sometimes you have to create, makeshift aircrafts or something to help them get to their buddy, and then you get rewarded with Korok seeds, so then you can like increase either the number of weapons, shields, or whatever, or bows that you want to carry. So that was in the last game. That does return in this game. They're all over the map. I've found so many of them, but I'm sure I'm not even close to finding all of them. Like I said, there's a lot of similarities between this and Breath of the Wild. I think that's why a lot of people are calling this like a glorified DLC, but I really don't agree with that. I really think that this is definitely, it feels like a proper sequel to me in many ways. But yes, combat is fun. It feels good. I mentioned last time, I think Link is he feels a little clunky at times. Like, I definitely feel like there were times in combat where Link wasn't maybe quite as agile or as quick as he could be, but overall, I think he controls very well. That's one thing that I've heard people say about this game is that, and I think also the last game too, is that they felt like because of the item durability, combat kind of feels like it's lacking a little bit, but I mean, truth be told, the Zelda games have never been known for having the most intricate combat. Like, this isn't a From Software game. It's not Elden Ring or Dark Souls or Bloodborne. I mean, it's pretty basic. It's just you have your attack, you have your block, you have your dodge. I mean, there's not much more to it, honestly. I think it works fine for what it is. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it. So yeah, I mean, it's not super intricate combat, but I think thanks to the fuse ability, I think it makes it a lot more fun. It gives you a lot more options. Like, you can literally attach explosive barrels to the end of a stick and just throw it at enemies and just blow them up. I mean, what more do you need? So the next thing I want to talk about is just like the overall world of this game. So one thing I've heard people say is that this world in some ways is 3 times the size of the map in the last game. And I kind of get what they're saying. In many ways, it kind of is. I mentioned before that there's the Sky Islands that you can explore above Hyrule, as well as the map of Hyrule itself, and both of those are pretty big in their own right. Although, I mean, I feel like there's a good amount of sky islands, but they're all relatively small. But I don't think they take up anywhere near as much space as like Hyrule. But there's another part of the map called the Depths, which I talked about last time, which is way beneath the kingdom of Hyrule. So there's different chasms throughout the entire kingdom where you can actually drop down into this realm, and it's actually where one of like the four main temples of the game are. And it's basically just like I said, it's another entire kingdom, essentially the exact same size as Hyrule, but it's covered in darkness, and you basically have to navigate your way through it. You find these little things called light roots, which are connected to like all of the shrines. Funny little or interesting little tidbit, I guess the names of all these light roots that you find are actually the names of the shrines, but backwards, which I thought was kind of cool. It's kind of an interesting little detail that Nintendo added. But you use these light roots to basically light up part of a small section of the map, and that's kind of how you discover more of the map of the Depths. And exploring the Depths to me was almost just as addicting as exploring Hyrule. I think just like finding the different light roots and lighting them up to me was like I had a hard time like stopping. I just wanted to keep going and see how much I could explore. And there's a whole bunch of like side missions down there you can do. Like there's so much you can do down there, and it's really fun. Like that almost feels like a whole other game in and of itself, is just exploring that whole part of the map. And like I've said before, like I like how each area of the map feels distinct. Like the desert, the Gerudo Desert feels like its own distinct area. Same thing with Rito Village, Goron Mountain, the Zora Realm. Like each area feels distinct, and it's genuinely fun to explore it. And like I said, it's one of those games like where it feels like every direction you look in, there's something to do. That's one major complaint that I've had for a lot of open world games, is that yeah, the world you're in is big and expansive, but it feels like there's not really a whole lot to do in terms of content. That is definitely not the case in this game. I really feel like this game, like, there was never a moment where I was just kind of walking around just, not really doing anything. I feel like there was always something to do. I always had some kind of side mission going on. I always had something in the distance I wanted to explore. It really feels like one of those games where you can look in almost any direction and find something to go check out. Whether it's a Korok seed to go find, a cave to explore, a group of enemies to take out, or something. It just feels like there's always something to do in this game, and that I really appreciate about it. I think Nintendo did a really good job of making this game feel like, at least in my opinion, one of the most content-filled open-world maps that I think I've seen in a very long time. Like, I've played games like Red Dead Redemption 2, and don't get me wrong, I like it, but a lot of open-world games, like I said, I think they kind of suffer from that problem. Like, they're cool when they work. Like, in terms of spectacle, like especially when the big cutscenes happen, the games are fun and they're really cool in those moments, but there's also a lot of just dead space where you're kind of just meandering around looking for something to do. I really don't think that happened to me very often playing Tears of the Kingdom. I can't think of hardly any moments in the game where I just genuinely was bored and had nothing better to do. Like, yes, there were times where I was exploring, but I was exploring with like a specific goal in mind. It was either to farm materials to upgrade my armor or weapons, or it was to find a shrine, or it was to get to a light route or something. Like, it feels like I always had something specific that I was working towards in the game. Like, the game definitely keeps you busy. Like, I've beaten the story, but I can already tell you right now, I'm going to keep playing. Like, just because I've barely scratched the surface in terms of like the side content to do and all the stuff that you can explore in the world. Like, exploring definitely feels like its own reward in this game. Another thing I want to talk about too in terms of the world itself, and this is something they brought back for this game that they didn't have in the last game that I really liked. I mean, when I say that, I mean I like that they brought it in this game, was they actually brought temples back. I know that was a big complaint a lot of people had from previous Zelda games, and I kind of agree with them. I miss temples. I miss the classic temples like the Temple of Time and stuff from Ocarina, and they actually bring temples back in this game, and that's really cool. And each temple is its own unique area. You've got the Fire Temple, the Wind Temple, the Water Temple, the Lightning Temple. It's really cool. Like, I like that they did that. And I like how each temple has its own unique look. Like, I like that my personal favorite was the Wind Temple, because I like how to get to that, you actually have to climb the mountain near Rito Village. And there's this whole section where you have to like jump and fly up above this humongous storm and dive down into it. And just in terms of spectacle, that was such a cool moment. In Breath of the Wild, there was like, they weren't really temples. They were what were they called? The divine beasts. And it was interesting because they were these giant, basically robotic animals. But I wasn't a huge fan of them, with the exception of maybe like the bird temple, just because it was in the air. I'm seeing a theme here. I feel like I like the Rito aspect of the games the most. But yeah, like other than that, I wasn't a huge fan of the Divine Beasts from the first game. They were fine, I guess, but I like that they actually had temples in this game. I like that they brought that back. It almost kind of feel like maybe a concession on Nintendo's part. Like, I know they're trying to move forward, they're trying to do new things and be innovative, but I like that they were at least willing to kind of give the fans something that they wanted. Like, okay, here you go, here's some temples. If I had to make a minor complaint about the temples in this game, though, I will say it does feel like they all four follow basically the same format. Like there's basically 4 or 5 locks that you have to unlock in order to open the door to the main boss. Like every temple basically follows that exact same format. Yes, the layout is different, the actual area they're in, and the temple itself is different, but basically what you're doing is essentially the same. So I guess I would have liked it if they could have maybe mixed that up a little bit. I don't know, maybe one temple is like the 4 or 5 locks, and then the next temple could be like some kind of arena, like a battle arena or something. I don't know, just something to kind of mix it up a little bit. In that respect, it kind of felt similar to Breath of the Wild, where yes, it was temples and that was cool, but all 4 temples felt very similar in that respect. But it wasn't a huge deal. It didn't really ruin the game for me or anything like that. So one thing I definitely wanted to touch on, though, is, like I said in my last video, I will say, yes, I do strongly recommend this game. If you're a Zelda fan, you definitely owe it to yourself to get it. I will say, though, I do think that this game suffers from a lot of the same problems as Breath of the Wild. The biggest one, of course, being item durability. I know that was a big point of contention in the last game. It was very divisive. A lot of people did not like that. I myself was one of them. And while I do think the fuse mechanic of this game does really help to mitigate that, if you really hated that in Breath of the Wild, like if that flat out ruined the game for you, it is in this game. So, yeah, if that's going to be a deal breaker for you, then I think that's something to keep in mind before you buy this game. Also, too, just in general, like they really haven't changed too much in terms of like the actual combat or anything. So, like if you're coming into this game expecting like more improved controls or like, you know, some kind of just different controls or innovation on top of what was in Breath of the Wild, again, not really here. It's control-wise, it's basically the same game. And while I do think Nintendo does enough to make this interesting and feel fresh, I can definitely understand, you know, some criticisms people have made where they were like, this feels a little too familiar sometimes. It's like, yeah, I get that, but I didn't personally have a problem with it. Yeah, like just in terms of my overall thoughts, I think this game is one of the best Zelda games ever made. If I had to rank this right now, it would easily go into my top 3. Like, I still think Wind Waker is probably my number 1 Zelda game, but I think this game is probably tied for second with Ocarina of Time. It really is that good. And like I said before, I personally think that this is going to go, if this doesn't win Game of the Year for 2023, I definitely think it's going to be a strong contender. And I think this is probably going to go down as like the best-selling, like one of the best games on the Switch, for sure. So it gets a strong recommendation from me, but I totally understand if you didn't like Breath of the Wild, if there were just elements of that game that you didn't like. Unfortunately, a lot of those are in this game, so I still say check it out, you know, see what you think. If you can at least borrow it from a friend, I would definitely recommend it, because I really think this game makes a lot of improvements that are really going to, I think, are going to make it much better for a lot of fans. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy it? How do you think it stacks up against Breath of the Wild? Feel free to let me know on my YouTube channel. So I was recording my thoughts for the trailer for the live-action One Piece series, and for some reason, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was just an issue with GarageBand, but part of it got deleted, so starting over from scratch, so that's always fun. But yes, also, first and foremost, I realize in my intro I accidentally said it was the One Piece live-action movie. Apologies, I meant to say series, but anyways, yeah, I remember reading about this being a thing like a year ago or so, but it kind of just faded from memory for a while. I'm not going to lie, I kind of thought this was one of those things that like it was just never going to happen, like it was never going to get off the ground, but no, we got a teaser trailer for it. The series comes out next month, like a little over a month from now. I think it's like August 30th on Netflix. Saw the trailer and just want to give my thoughts on it really quick. I am conflicted on this. I really don't know how to feel about this. On the one hand, it doesn't look as bad as I was expecting it to. On the other hand, it looks kind of awkward in some scenes. There's definitely parts in the trailer that kind of make me think it looks almost like a fan-made trailer, but then there's other parts where it actually does look like it's got some decent quality to it, or at least budget, like a decent amount of budget went into making it. I will say, for the most part, I do like how it looks. It looks like One Piece. I'll give it that much. It has kind of a cartoony look, like we see the serpent from like the beginning of the series that Luffy fights right when he leaves his hometown. They made it look almost like how it does in the anime. Like it's CG, but it looks almost like cartoony CG, which is interesting. I guess it's supposed to be like the fantastical world of One Piece. Maybe this is how they're supposed to capture that. I'm not really sure. Yeah, it's it's interesting. It looks like it's going to follow the first 2 or 3 arcs of the anime series. Romance Dawn, whatever the arc is called, where they meet Usopp, and then the Barati restaurant arc. So based on that, I mean, it looks like we know for a fact that Buggy's going to be in it because we get a glimpse of him in the trailer. He looks kind of interesting. He looks menacing. We get to see a little bit of him. There's some interaction between Luffy and Zoro. Those two characters have the most like dialogue in the trailer. We see glimpses of Nami, Sanji, and Usopp. Nami has a couple lines in the trailer, but mostly it's Luffy and Zoro that we get to see talk and get to see them do most of the action sequences. But yeah, like that's interesting. So I wonder if this does well and there's a second season, I wonder if each season is going to be roughly 3 to 4 arcs. I guess it depends on how long they are. But yeah, I mean, it looks like it follows the first 3 arcs, so we're going to see a couple of villains from the show too, I assume. Like we get a slight glimpse of Alvida's character when Luffy first punches her when he meets Kobe. We didn't see Captain Kuro. I'm curious to see how they're going to adapt him for the live action series. And I'm really curious to see Don Krieg and if Mihawk are going to show up. Those are 2 characters that I'm very interested to see. Number one, if they're going to be in this and how they're going to look. Mainly Mihawk for sure. As far as the cast and crew of the main characters, it looks like it's going to be mainly the first 5 members of the Straw Hat crew: Luffy, Zoro, Nami, Usopp, and Sanji. Again, Usopp, Sanji are really not in the trailer that much. We don't get to see much of them. They don't have any speaking lines. Emily Rudd as Nami, we get to see her talk a little bit. There's some back and forth between her and Zoro's character. But it's mostly Inaki Godoy as Monkey D. Luffy and Makinyu Arata as Zoro. I'm probably butchering those names, but those are the 2 that get the most lines. And I will say, the actor that plays Luffy does look like he is giving some heart to the role. He looks like he's having fun with it, so I'll give him props for that. And I do think the actor that plays Zoro does capture his demeanor for the most part. Like, he looks like a pretty good Zoro. Although he does look a little bit more serious in this than I think Zoro was in the beginning of the series. I think Zoro kind of cut up more in the beginning of One Piece, and then later he became more hardened and serious, but I mean, that's not a big deal or anything. We also get to see a little bit of them fighting too. We get to see when the fight scene when Luffy rescues Zoro from the execution ground. Get to see a little bit of Luffy's, gum abilities, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, it looks weird, but I don't know if that's because they're trying to make it look like he's made of rubber or if it's just because the CG isn't that good. Like when his arm stretches out, when he's on that boat and he's getting ready to punch, I assume it's Alvida. So I'm curious to see if that'll look better when the show actually premieres. I'm not really sure about that. The highlight for me was definitely seeing Zoro in a sword fight in the trailer. I'm not sure who he was fighting. I didn't really get a good look at that character, but we see him using his 2-sword style. And I think there was one brief glimpse where we see him doing his 3-sword style. I'm really curious to see, like, just from Zoro's perspective, because that was always a big thing in the show, is that he always has one of his katanas in his mouth when he fights 3-sword style. I wonder if the show's going to do that, and how they're going to do that. Are they really going to have the actor hold a katana in his teeth, or, like, are they just going to CGI it in? Because that was something I always wondered about with the anime series, was like, man, that's kind of hurt his teeth to do that. So I'll be very curious to see how they handle that. I'm kind of on the fence about this. Because on the one hand, yeah, it's kind of giving me Cowboy Bebop vibes. And I know that show did not do well. I never saw it, but I know it was not well received. And a lot of my buddies were not fans of it. Especially my friends who were fans of the original anime series. It's not giving me Dragon Ball Evolution vibes. We're not going to that level yet. This definitely doesn't look as bad as that. And from what I heard, it sounds like Oda, the author of the manga, was, I think, at least involved with I guess he signed off on like how this looks, supposedly. So I guess we'll see if this, how true this is to the source material. Something else I'm curious about too is if this does do well, I wonder if we're going to get at least a glimpse of like the Arlong arc, like whenever they go to help Nami with her situation. I would definitely be curious to see how Fishman would look in this show. But I definitely have some concerns. One, it's One Piece. I don't know how well One Piece works as a live action series just because the character designs from the anime series are so weird. They're just so different from any other anime series that I've seen. The way the characters act and stuff is kind of weird too. And not only that, but just it's like, why did Netflix pick One Piece of all anime series? Netflix, the streaming service that is notorious for canceling shows after one season, why would they pick the longest running anime manga series like ever? One Piece is still going and they're on like what, 1100 episodes now? It's insane. Like, I don't know why Netflix picked this up. But on the one hand, I do think it would be hilarious if this was just like a monumental financial success and they just kept making live action episodes of it. And then it ended up being, One Piece ends up being the longest running anime, manga, and live action series ever made. I think that would be hilarious if that happened. I don't know if I'm going to say that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm definitely curious. I think I'm more curious than anything else. I want to see it because I want to see how it plays out. I have very low expectations for this show. I mean, it looks like the actors and actresses are having fun, at least from what I saw in the trailer. I'm going to wait and see like when the next trailer comes out so we can kind of get a little bit more of it to see how it plays out. But I mean, so far it looks like it could be entertaining. At the very least, I think it could be worth a watch. I think what I'm going to do is, because I don't have Netflix right now, I kind of canceled my account, but I do want to watch the new season of Witcher, the third season, and then of course I want to watch season 2 of Record of Ragnarok. So what I might do is wait for One Piece to come out and then just binge watch all 3 of those shows together. So whenever this does come out, I'll definitely give my thoughts on it just to kind of see how it stacks up against the anime series and stuff. I know in general live action anime adaptations are they don't have a good record so far, not a winning record, but it would really blow my mind if One Piece ends up being the thing that bucks that trend, but I don't see that happening. This trailer didn't do anything to reassure me that this is going to be good, but it did not look as bad as I was expecting, because I was expecting something to look truly horrendous, but time will tell on that, I guess. All right, everybody, I think that's going to conclude today's episode. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you like what you heard, and I'll catch you all next time. Later.